my name is Emily Davis. This is my presentation around Unit 1. So beginning with Project 1, the kind of initial spark of interest came for me from in the workshops looking at investigative illustration. So this is from the V&A, and as I was studying these objects, what really drew me to them more than the objects themselves was the text around them and how they're presented and curated by the museum in a really specific way, kind of positioning them in grids, numbering them, labeling them. And that for me was a really interesting way of looking at visual language. So then in the workshops moving forward, like the journey to Cutty Sark that we made from uni, my focus was on all the objects that I found discarded on the ground, these kind of remnants of that journey, but instead of kind of treating them like the rubbish that they are, I used that visual language of the kind of museum curation and placed them in these grid formats, numbering them by the order that I found them. And for me, that kind of was a really interesting insight into the power of an illustrative format to transform rubbish into something interesting and valuable. I did the same thing, as you can see on the right, with kind of collecting organic forms from Greenwich Park and arranging them in that grid format, which kind of led me into some of the research that I did around archaeology and ancient sites. And for me, what was really interesting is that these ancient sites are an interest of mine personally. It goes back to kind of going there with my dad when I was younger, and the white horses in Wiltshire and seeing all of them and the stone circles and that whole landscape around there, which holds a lot of mysticism and sort of ancient folklore. But the way that this is translated in excavation reports and land dig reports is really, really clinical. As you can see on the right, it doesn't kind of explore any of that folklore or the kind of history around that, but instead views it as a sort of physical, scientific exploration. So kind of looking at the research around cartography was important in this sense, kind of seeing how map making in general and plotting out a land visually has a really specific format. And so even on the left, instantly we view that as a map, whereas actually this place isn't real. This isn't a map of an existing area. It's made up by the artist from memories of their childhood. And kind of comparing that with the kind of organic forms of an aerial view of a place as seen on the right, kind of brings into question these ideas of how we map a place and why that becomes so synonymous with that area, when actually it is a distortion of that place. So kind of moving into trying to talk about how communities form around these places. Again, like I said, a lot of archaeologists are interested in the ancient sites of the white horses, but also religious groups and tourists. And this was obviously a scope that I could have looked into, but really what I found interesting and what was a turning point for me in this project was this image, which was trying to answer the question of who is interested in your theme. And really, for me, it was creating this image in the middle, which was a kind of instinctive, investigative illustration, thinking about why is this memory of being there with my dad on this trip to see the white horses so imprinted and visceral in my brain. And I remember these kind of foggy sort of drives through the night, going through these stone circles, trying to find these ancient sites. And I think this was a turning point in realising that it's that kind of wanting to dredge up and uncover and resurface the past and resurface these memories is very similar to the kind of act of excavation when excavating a site, an archaeological site, and that link is really sort of specific and integral to what I ended up doing. So within the technical pathways, this is a zinc plate lithograph that I made, again kind of exploring these ideas, but at this point it felt very scattered. I was kind of looking at kind of how to visually symbolise these memories and kind of childhood and what that might mean. So moving into project 2, I mapped all of these connections, kind of looked at what it was that was really kind of making it tick for me. And an interesting thing that came about from that was the idea of visual language itself and kind of the format of illustration that takes place when different things are recorded, kind of absences are attempted to kind of be recorded. So taking a visual language and applying it to something that it may not ever usually be used for. This was an experiment within that, kind of taking planning and very sort of specific rules of formation and placing it on something very abstract and kind of imagined. Creates that kind of a didactic approach. So that was kind of my plan really with my final outcome, was to take the template of this is a dig report, an excavation report of a real excavation, and kind of looking at how the diagrams are made and the format of the pages and the composition, and applying that instead to a very personal and specific experience. So this is some work by Paolozzi, which again was quite formative in my research, because he took the kind of his own emotional experiences and then used this kind of labeling format, and played around with that idea, which I brought into my own work. So this is my final kind of piece, and I looked at my own memories and my own kind of brain essentially as this site of excavation, and then created diagrams and drawings around what that meant, kind of fragmented moments and places and objects and the memory of smells and touch, and kind of trying to format those in a way that mimicked that visual language of archaeological dig reports. Um, so I was really happy with that kind of outcome, I think, because in project 3 and kind of my critical position as an illustrator, I was looking really at investigative drawing, and working out through making, and kind of using drawing as a way to explore fields that are very far outside of illustration itself. So looking forward into the future, I kind of want to continue along these themes of kind of memories and personal subjective experiences, archaeology, kind of resurfacing, but I would really like to look more into interactive formats, because that was something that I thought this project could have really used, was taking these very traditional mediums but being able to translate them in a more accessible form. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my presentation.